Now we're going to hear from Akiea Gross, who is a social entrepreneur and founder of Equitable Schools. So Akiea is a former instructional coach, early childhood educator, and creative entrepreneur who believes in designing a more inclusive, equitable, and empathy-driven world through education, music, and the arts. Akiea's experiences as a Black teacher led her to create hashtag Black Teachers Matter, and she has it on her shirt, I think, too. Very cool.
Yes.
And she founded Equitable Schools, Inc., a nonprofit on a mission to empower the community to improve equity in schools. She is currently the creator and producer of the Women of Color and QTPOC focused intimate concert series, Sisters Unsigned, and she recently launched her own education consulting arm called Woke Kindergarten. She holds a master's in developmental psychology from Teachers College, Columbia University, and an MS in childhood education and special education from the Progressive Education Institute. And she received her undergraduate degrees in child development and family studies and psychology from UNC Chapel Hill. I love how long our bios are. We've got a lot of letters, a lot of life experience. Thank you, Akiea.
Oh, thank you. Which button do I push? This one? See, I don't know how to use these. This one? Put it right. Gotcha. Oh, cool. Hi, everybody. This just came off. it literally just came off. Yeah, I know, right? All right, cool. I'm small, so. Yeah, hi, everybody. My name's Akiea Gross. Like she said, founded Equitable Schools, and seen a couple people in here with Black Teachers Matter shirts, so thank you for supporting. Today, I want to briefly kind of discuss in my 7 minutes about why Black teachers matter, especially for Black children in early childhood. So when Zip initially asked me to be a part of Black Children Thriving, I kind of got goosebumps. Not because she asked me to participate, but because no one had ever asked me to consider what that looked like before, especially in this work. Not that this isn't work that I've been trying to actively do, but nobody sat there and named it and said, well, what does it look like or feel like for Black children to thrive, right? Because we live in a country where it's about Black children surviving. Because when everything we see in the news is about our babies dying, nobody thinks about what it would really be like for them to live and to live good, right? So I thought about it, and I thought about it within the context of the institution of schools. And presently, I thought, okay, well, what would it take for Black children to thrive in schools? And really, we would just have to burn the whole system down. Literally, that's what we would have to do initially. And because that's going to take a while, and everybody in this room, I'm sure, is trying to work towards that goal, I thought to myself, well, let's be realistic, right? We know that our kids are going to have to participate in these institutions for as long as they're around. So what would they need at a very foundational level to be able to thrive? And to me, I thought, well, would Black children be able to thrive in environments where everyone doesn't look like them, doesn't sound like them, doesn't experience life the same way as them? Is it possible for Black children to truly thrive in those environments? And that's important because we're not talking about survival, right? We're not even talking about just living. We're talking about thriving. So that means not just talking about needs, we're talking about wants. Not just necessities, but also desires. So in what respect would kids need? What would they need to function? And so for me, it felt like at the core, at minimum, it's having Black teachers, right? So we could talk about why Black teachers matter for days, and we can do it in a way where it's really qualitative, because that's what I prefer anyway. But I will say this, I have a silly relationship with research, and maybe other people do as well. I believe that the Black experience in itself is research, and that we don't need anybody to quantify our experiences in order for them to be valid or hold truth. So I'm not gonna sit here and tell you where I got these facts from. You can go research it, but at the end of the day, take it at face value and believe what you want. And if it suits you to go say, okay, hey, where did I get these facts from? Because maybe you need some funding for your organization or something. Do that, right? Because that's essentially what happens, is that our stories have to be quantified for them to be real. So why do Black teachers matter, right? And some of the facts that I pulled were the fact that kids fare better long term. I'm sure a lot of people have seen a recent article that talked about how kids having just one Black teacher in early childhood kind of changed the game for them later on, right? And so that should get you thinking about, how was your K to 12 schooling experiences? How many Black teachers did you have, and did that make an impact on you? Another is the role model effect, right? If I'm a Black child and I walk into my classroom and I see somebody in a perceived position of power, and they're sharing that power communally with me, then all of a sudden, all these different opportunities open up for what I can be. When I was young, I didn't think teaching was a Black thing. I thought it was a white thing. So it never occurred to me to be a teacher. And I just kind of fell into the work because I love kids, right? So think about that. Think about how powerful it is just at face value for a child to see you in that classroom. Again, improved academics. So if we think about that, we could talk about all these quantifiable facts, but if you think about it, a lot of people in this room are probably doing critical work, right? You're thinking about pedagogy, you're talking about cultural responsiveness, you're talking about cultural relevancy, you're talking about critical consciousness, right? So if you think about that, and you think about the fact that Black educators were literally the originators of project-based learning and experiential learning, then you should know that the academics are going to improve when you exist in this environment where your teachers are teaching you within context. If I'm learning about who I am within the context in which I live, then my academics are going to improve. Again, related to that, higher expectations. We know that Black teachers have higher expectations for our kids. We know that because we also know that white teachers generally tend to have lower expectations of Black children than they do our kids' white counterparts, right? We know that with higher expectations comes the fact that, oh, I believe that you can do more than what anybody else is saying you can do. That comes with the fact that we're centering kids individually first. Again, we read that kids feel happier, better cared for, and have better communication with teachers. And that's huge. So you got a lot of teachers in here. It's big when your kids come to talk to you, right? No matter how old they are. That's a huge thing. So to know that Black children have better communications with their teachers when Black teachers are present, that's a big deal. And lastly, and of course it's not lastly, but Black kids experience less exclusionary discipline with Black teachers. Now, we know that's not true for all of us, right? And so I'm going to get to that work later. But the idea that this is something that we have to talk about, you're getting disciplined differently. You're not experiencing as much corporal punishment from your Black teachers as you are elsewhere. That's a problem, but it's also something to think about, right? I'm going to skip over this. So this slide before, and it's just going to take up too much time, but it is on YouTube, is once I started to consider that Black teachers mattered for kids, right? And I had a really profound experience in my teaching years where I had a classroom, a kindergarten classroom a few years ago, and this class in particular had the most trauma of any class I'd ever taught. And so initially, everything was really difficult because it was like my school, it was a charter school, was not set up to support these kids emotionally in the ways that they needed. Maybe 4 or 5 months in, my associate teacher left, and I had the opportunity to teach with a Black cis man. And so I realized later on how much of an anomaly that was, that my kids not only had one Black teacher, but 2 in the same classroom. One was a woman and one was a man. That shit was wild. Excuse my language. That was wild. I apologize. It was just wild to think about. I told myself I would not curse. I'm just so passionate about the work. So I realized in those moments when we had to create the first grade classes for next year, we had to sort our kids into these groups, into what might be their classroom. And it never worked out. People always wanted to change things. And people didn't understand why I was holding certain kids' names back. Like, I was hesitant. They were Akiea, put your kid's name on. But who are the teachers? And they were like, we don't know yet. I said, but you understand that matters, right? Just teachers, what teacher are they going to have? I can't put this child with just anybody. They're not going to know what he needs. They're not going to know what he needs. So I'm afraid, and I was afraid. And these classes were made, and they completely shifted and switched them around. And then the next year was really tragic for a lot of my kids. Many of my kids got suspended so many times, I can't even count how many times, that they ended up having to leave the school. So I was sitting in my classroom one day, and I thought to myself, and I looked around, and at the time, there weren't a lot of teachers that looked like my kids or looked like me, and I thought to myself, wow, like, it really does make a difference having a black teacher. So this video is me just asking a few of my friends and my partner who's here today, like, to think about your experiences with black teachers or lack thereof. So I encourage, this is an old video, but it's pretty profound in what people are saying. Now, when we talk about black educators, we have to also acknowledge that we are the 7%, right? You can give or take a few percentage points, but the attrition rates are so high for teachers of color that it's gonna stay around 7. So unless we can figure out how to thrive ourselves, we're probably gonna keep leaving. So we're the 7%. And in thinking about that, we need to make sure that we're really hyper-focusing on community and what that means, because in order for our kids to thrive, we need to make sure that we're setting up communities for us to thrive as well. So Dr. Angela Davis said this, and many of you probably already seen it. When children attend schools that place a greater value on discipline and security than on knowledge and intellectual development, they are attending prep schools for prison. And this is really real, and I want to specifically hone in on black educators right now, because if we really want our children to thrive, then we have to acknowledge that there's a lot of dismantling we have to do internally within ourselves. That when we say black teachers matter, it's not enough to be a body in a classroom. It's not enough to be a black teacher in a classroom. That's not enough. We have to be able to do the internal work where we're actually engaging in anti-oppressive pedagogy, right? If we're sitting here and we're perpetuating the same type of oppression that this system was built to oppress our kids, like that the system has built to oppress our kids, then are we really making that much of a difference? It could be even more detrimental, because they're seeing us and they're like, why are you doing this to me, right? So my thing is we need to build this community, and part of building that community is recognizing that, yes, black teachers are really important for kids, but we're also really important for families. We're really important for families. And sometimes there tends to be a culture within schools where it's like teachers first, we got everybody's back. NYPD does that. At the end of the day, for me, I didn't teach for anybody that I was working with. No shade. I taught for my kids and my families. So if I'm gonna be in the classroom and I know that this mama hasn't brought her kid to school in 20 days, I'm not going to sit there and be like, she doesn't care about her child's education, this, and that. No. You know why? Because empathy. That's what we bring. I'm going to sit here and try to understand where you're coming from and what's going on and how it can help you and build that community around you to uphold you, because no one else will. And on top of that, beyond that, we have to recognize, too, that black teachers, we matter for each other. Like, we really matter for each other. That means if you're in a school and you see your colleague do something that's really oppressive, you got to hold them accountable. We got to hold each other accountable. The same way we have to make space for our kids to be able to hold us accountable, we have to make sure we're holding each other accountable. Otherwise, what's the point? So a few things that I feel like as black teachers, again, we can't just show up. We have to be present, we have to engage, we have to do all of these things. So some of the things we need to do, we need to provide opportunities for joy, right? Our kids need to be able to experience joy when they come in our classrooms. They need to be able to play, create, imagine, explore. That's what they need. Culture. They need to be able to feel affirmed in their culture and who they are. They need to be able to feel that connection. We need to be able to connect with our kids and show our kids empathy, right? I could tell something real quick about this, but in the middle, I designed a unit called Everyday Heroes versus Superheroes through the lens of Black history and resistance. And my kids did like a critical analysis of superheroes. And what they found was that most of the superheroes were quote unquote boys. And also most of them were white. Some of them were green, but most of them were white. And so they thought that this was unfair. And instead of creating some like new fantastical superheroes, we decided to kind of look within ourselves and kind of harness our everyday powers that we have, powers like generosity and compassion, and actually create superheroes within our own likeness. So we became the superheroes we were seeking. That's what we need to be doing, right? And history, that's a big one. These are all my kids, by the way. So our kids need to be learning more than their ancestors were enslaved, right? We need to inform, but we need to do it in a way where we inform to transform, right? So our kids need to be able to feel affirmed in who they are and recognize that they're too a part of Black history. And community, we talked about that one already, so I won't dive too deeply into it. But if you're thinking about the way we set up our classrooms, we need to make sure that the classroom is a space where we're sharing. Like if a child is looking at another child's paper, you're not sitting here saying, stop cheating, don't do that. You're saying, oh, okay, like I'm showing you what I've already learned. Let me see how I can share my knowledge with you, right? So I'll leave you with this. Black children need and deserve Black teachers who believe in liberation, who will advocate for their needs, who support one another, and who are constantly engaging in the internal work necessary for Black children to thrive. At the end, that's why Black teachers matter.